I would want to suggest that,
Is your microphone on?
yes, it is. Well, call to order. The first item on the agenda is election of officers, chairman and vice chairman. Do we have a nomination for chairman?
I'll nominate Peter.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All right. Thank you very much, team. For vice chairman, I nominate Glenn.
I second it.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All right. Interestingly, I want to welcome that Catherine was reappointed, and Noah Powers, who we just found is not going to be here. In fact, a few years ago was on the board. So we do have all of that background and legacy and knowledge that we've built up. What I wanted to do, though, is after approving the minutes, suggest to rearrange the agenda such that the rate issues would be first addressed, and then we'd follow in with the annual report and old business. So with that, do I have an approval of the minutes?
Also move.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Public comment? I see no public, so I'll go forward. One of the things that I think could be helpful before we get into the actual discussion of the electric rates. Jim, would you mind giving us a background as to what the status is with the deal? Because at the last council meeting, there seemed to be an expectation that in March we would have a clear view, and I would like your comments.
Definition of clear view, I guess, is the relevant area. Where we stand right now is Florida Power and Light and FMPA still have to resolve the issue of a three-year power supply agreement. And the only way that's going to really be resolved is between those two parties, whether it's sold to OUC or to a third party. But FP&L and FMPA have to come to that conclusion as to how that will work. The clear path forward, in the 2.5 years that I've been involved in this, I'm not sure that I know what a clear path is anymore. It is hoped that in January, before the end of this month, FMPA will be discussing publicly what their proposal was to FP&L. FP&L, in the meantime, has been in discussions with FMPA and have had those conversations, and they will be continuing. It is planned by FMPA, according to their board, that in February they will be discussing those terms and the responses from FP&L, or where the responses happen to be at that particular time. We all understand that before anything really goes to the board, Nick Garriello and Fred Bryant both have to sign off on this. And so those two people are going to be instrumental, with emphasis on Fred more than anyone, as to how it goes. What is presented in January probably will be the FMPA proposal. What is done in February with the board of directors will be contingent upon what takes place between FP&L and FMPA between now and then. Because it could be, if they come to a conclusion, then obviously that takes care of that major issue. Now, there are several more issues to go. For example, if, depending on how that is concluded, you still have to go to the Public Service Commission. You may have to go back to FERC. And so you have some of those things that you have to still deal with as to making it solidify the deal altogether. But it is hoped that if FP&L and FMPA have some type of an agreement, that in February we will see the board of directors. And if Nick Garriello and Fred Bryant agree to those terms and conditions, I think we will have another one of our elements on the checklist to be taken care of. But it does not mean that if the meeting is on February the 25th, that on the 26th we're setting a closing date, that we're still farther out. But it does get another element out of the way.
Another issue also is the oil requirements project and the closing date and how that is impacted and what the status of that is.
One of the elements that you have in the FPL proposal is that FMPA will help us conclude that. Now, going to the cities and getting them to sign off on that, we've made a big deal that we'll all go do a show and tell and that kind of stuff. But the fact of the matter is that if it is in the best interest of FMPA as determined by Fred Bryant, a resolution will go out to those cities, and Fred, hopefully, if he agrees with the terms and conditions, will sign off on that. The great majority of the time, all the cities will go along with the recommendation from Fred Bryant as to how this impacts FMPA. And if he says that this is a positive impact on FMPA, I would put my money on the fact that we could get clarifications from the cities pretty quick.
Thank you. That's helpful. Members have any comments or questions?
You want the South Beach update as well, since I'm up here?
Sure.
South Beach update, the county, Indian River County, will be making a presentation to the city council on Tuesday evening. In their proposal, they have several elements that I take exception to. For example, they are saying that the city would relinquish all ownership rights to the facilities on the South Beach, which obviously we don't agree with. That the city would not impose the same rate structure that, for example, the county imposes on the city of Sebastian. For those who don't know, the county serves inside the corporate limits of the city of Sebastian. They have county rates plus an equalization charge of 6%. In my opinion, that would be what I would recommend to the city council, that same. And in the city of Sebastian, as well as Indian River Shores, and in this particular case, if the governing authority, the elected body, wants to impose a 6% franchise fee, that's totally to their discretion, and they could do that. But I think it's only fair that we would have the same rate structure and the same rates that the county imposes on Sebastian, and it would only be fair to our customers in Indian River Shores because it is the same rate structure we impose on our customers in Indian River Shores. There are a couple other little elements in there. For example, they call it a 30-year franchise agreement. The fact of the matter is, unilaterally, the county can terminate the franchise agreement in 10 years. So to me, that's a 10-year franchise, not a 30-year franchise. So we have some concerns about that. But the county will be making that presentation. The county attorney is the individual who has sent the letter and sent the terms and conditions on that. Another part of this, and we focused on South Beach, but the fact of the matter is this is a franchise that includes the hospital as an example and other customers in and around the city. So South Beach is easy to identify, but the fact of the matter is there's more customers involved in this discussion than what they have. My recommendation to the council will be on Tuesday is that we go ahead and impose the county rates if that's what county customers want, and if that's what the county wants, since that's a major issue, it appears, that we could go ahead and do the same thing we did in Indian River Shores and apply those rates to county customers. And the way it affects county customers will be different depending on your consumption pattern.
And I understand from some of the previous presentations you made, not everyone is going to see lower rates depending upon their usage. In fact, in the aggregate, it may be higher revenue.
The GAI study says that it'd be right around 1% increase, but everything would be based on the consumption. And when the GAI study was done a couple of years ago, the consumption patterns were a little different. Again, it's weather dependent. We have dry seasons. People water their yards and everything else, and obviously you click up into the next structure of that rate. But from my standpoint, we don't have to wait to 2017 in order to implement the county rates, if that's what we want to do. Under our existing franchise, it says we can institute city rates, and right now we have two rates. One is Indian River Shores, one is inside the city, and that we can't charge more than the 10% surcharge. Obviously, the equalization is not a surcharge of any type. It's really what it's determined to be.
Well, that would beg the question then about if that's the case and it goes forward, what about the customers in the city of Vero Beach itself?
We could adopt the rates here, but again, you need to know that that impact could have some major impacts, for example, on our commercial, and you take our hotels on the beach, it could have a significant impact on them because it's designed for the higher consumers. By the way, in my proposal, not only the county rates, but we would drop the 10% surcharge. So we would eliminate that issue from the rate structure outside the city. Either way, and again, going back to the GAI study, it shows we're virtually revenue neutral when it all washes out. And we have seen no hiccups in the several months that we've had, almost a year now, on Indian River Shores. We have not really seen any significant change from our revenue streams.
Well, thank you very much. Commissioners, any comments? It certainly was helpful for me to understand perspective, and hopefully someone in the public is watching. With that, Councilman, Vice Mayor, excuse me, the discussion of lowering electric rates is on the agenda.
Jay Kramer, 5035 Tradewinds Drive. I brought this issue forward to the City Council a couple of meetings ago. Mainly, this was brought up because of the observations that I saw on wholesale power. In addition to some of the other financing that I've been indicators that I've been seeing, it looks like with the wholesale rate of power has been leveled off probably since last April and May, and is slowly trending downward. And what that had suggested is that maybe we need to look at the rate structure again. If the wholesale power rates have been slowly going down, we probably don't need to be raising our rates. I did have a couple of graphs. I think they were in the backup of my item when I put it towards City Council. I don't know if it made it to your backup just yet. But in any case, I think Tom, you keep a pretty good database or a spreadsheet of those rates. I'd rather defer to Tom Richards rather than myself. I'd hate to make a mistake on that. But in any case, I think it's worth looking at those rates as far as the wholesale rates and seeing that they actually do trend downward. In addition, the amount of volume that we have in sales is actually starting to come back up as well. And that does translate into a little bit more profits. But I think what happens is that going forward, I think the finance group is looking at possibly visiting this on a quarterly basis, and instead of trying to maybe make a big change, maybe on a quarterly basis, we just kind of make small changes so we don't end up finding ourselves really far in arrears or really far ahead and making large swings, but we can make more intelligent, more incremental changes as time goes on. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Wouldn't this be more of a utility commission issue rather than a finance commission issue?
Well, the decision really does come down to the finance side of things. I've got an appointee on the finance board. I don't have one on the utilities commission. It would be nice to have the Utilities Commission take a look at this as well. And if they would like to put that on their agenda and take a look at it, that's fine.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you, Councilman. Vice Mayor. I'd just like to make some comment regarding Cindy before that there are three components of rate making in this situation. In broad, one is the fixed cost of OUC. That if you have no generation, you still have a fixed cost that you have to cover. The second is Vero Beach fixed cost. With no generation, you still have a cost. And then thirdly is a variable cost, which primarily is fuel based upon usage. And what happens is that first you have to overcome those fixed costs. For example, the 100 employees in the city of Vero Beach Electric, if you had no usage in the entire year, you'd still have to cover it. But simplistically, that is what the rate rate base has to include on a whole host of estimates, which, as we know, is weather dependent. We know it has peaks and valleys. But as usage increased, as Vice Mayor said, in fact, you throw off more operating income. But the problem is when the usage decreases and the variable costs go up, it has the opposite effect. I know that's a simplistic approach to a very complex and makes your hair hurt to try to go through it. But with that as just a quick background, Cindy, you have the floor, and hopefully the news that you're going to present is somewhat different than in previous situations.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. What I'd like to do in your package are lots and lots of numbers. And, I include those because some people like that sort of thing. And if you want to go through that in detail and see the basis for our rate projections, that's great. But there really are maybe 4 or 5 key elements to that package that I'd like to go through. But before I do, I'd like to take a moment to put a framework around those numbers and explain what it is, and I've had some of this conversation with the Utility Commission, what our goals and objectives are when we set rates. Because without goals, then you can't understand why the numbers are panning out the way they are. Our first very, very simple goal is that the total revenues we create have to exceed our total expenditures by a reasonable margin. And that last part of the sentence is important. And when we look at the detail, there have been times in years past where, as Vice Mayor Kramer pointed out, rate adjustments were made where we got really far behind, and then there was another huge swing back in the other direction. And the margins that by which we exceeded our expenses were much larger because they had to be, because the deficits were much larger. If you look at the utility rate sufficiency bottom line, those bottom line pages that we've been producing for the last couple of years, the margins we're looking at in either direction are less than 1% of revenue. And so we're not talking about a huge margin, but we're talking about what we think is a reasonable margin for our total revenues to exceed our total expenses. The second thing that's inherent in this is our feeling that we need to keep an appropriate level of cash reserves. There's been a lot of discussion about what is that appropriate level, and 90 days is the number that we kick around. That 90-day target is in line with the Government Finance Officers Association best practices for municipal enterprise funds, as a minimum 90 days. And then you mitigate that 90 days depending on your circumstances as a utility. Again, are you in a hurricane-prone area? May that cause the need for immediate cash? How good are your collections? How much control do you have over your customer base? But 90 days for them is your starting point, your baseline.
Cindy, let me interrupt. You're talking about 90 days working capital or 90 days liquid capital.
90 days, and we'll look at the numbers in a minute. For me, there's been a lot of talk about the phrase working capital. And the working capital definition is a pretty esoteric one that includes not only cash,
Right.
but unrestricted assets and et cetera,
It's-
et cetera. And
it's
it is
liquid
certainly,
capital you're talking about.
it's certainly one measure of liquidity that bond rating agencies use. For me, the better, simpler measure of liquidity is unrestricted cash.
I agree.
And I have a sheet in here where we can have a look at what we have in the way of unrestricted cash and what our historical performance has been. You know, and that leads me to the second thing. And again, we had this conversation with the utility commission. After we consummate the sale and what we'll have as a residual balance, all of that aside, right now, until we consummate this sale, we have to operate this utility as a going concern. And one of the things that we have to do is have annual or semi-annual reviews by our bond rating agencies. And they look at our increases or decreases in net assets, and they look at our liquidity measures. And a couple of years ago, again, when we look at this one historical sheet I've put together, we actually got a slight downgrade because of a year when our cash eroded and our our net asset position went down by almost $2 million. So it's very, very important, we think, to maintain those appropriate levels of cash reserves. The last goal that we've had for the last few years is rate stability. And by that, I mean, again, as Vice Mayor Kramer pointed out, we've tried to achieve minor adjustments in rates and not huge swings. And we had periods of time in the last 6 years where rates went as high as, I think, at one point $158 for a 1,000 kilowatt hour residential customer, down to lows of 110 and 115 in very short periods of time. And what we've tried to do is, with those first two goals in mind, revenues covering expenditures, not eroding our appropriate cash balances, also look to a bit more rate stability and a bit smaller adjustments instead of those big swings. And what we've done since about 2011 is make annual adjustments, although at one point those adjustments were made as frequently as quarterly and sometimes a month or month and a half apart. I think we'd like to suggest after this that we monitor quarterly and consider adjusting quarterly, which is what we're suggesting that we do now, is make a quarterly adjustment. But again, with an eye toward those adjustments being, as much as it's within our control, relatively minor in the scheme of things. So with that, the bottom line of the recommendation that we're making in this package is based on what happened back in October. We did an update to our 12-13 analysis, and what it looked like to us was we'd be about $925,000 short in fiscal 12-13. In 13-14, we prepared a going forward estimate that included some more conservative estimates of purchase power costs, a sales forecast that was based on 3 years average actuals, which is getting to be a pretty good indicator. And what we did was we suggested that with that more conservative purchase power cost approach, that we needed an increase in the fuel cost component of the rates to not only provide sufficiency, in other words, more revenues than expenses, but also recover what we were projecting as that 12-13 deficit of $900,000. So back in October of last year, with review by the Utility Commission, we increased that rate from $74 to $76.50 per megawatt hour. And we're projecting at the time it would create that $900,000 in 13-14 that we needed to cover the $900,000 deficit from 12-13. And at that time we said, hey, we'll let this run for a quarter and then we'll look and see where we are. Again, because we're talking about something that the forecasts are incredibly weather dependent on the revenue side, and also on the purchase power side, completely not under our control. So after a quarter, we looked at it again with October and November actuals and very preliminary December actuals, and we found two things. One, our 12-13 deficit, with all of the year-end adjustments in, has improved a bit. It's about $625,000, not $925,000. And second, our 13-14 going forward, with the first quarter in, has improved by about $800,000, mostly because we had higher revenues, but our purchase power cost stayed right around our original forecast. So rather than our sales going up and our costs going up, our sales went up and our costs stayed about where our original forecast was. So what we're suggesting right now is based on that first quarter and based on the results of 12/13, that we make a small adjustment back in the direction of the $76.50 is where we sit right now on the fuel cost part, that we go back to 75, not all the way back to where we were, but back to $75, and monitor that for a quarter and see where we stand. That will still give us a recovery of our 12/13 deficit and still give us, in my opinion, a reasonable margin over expenses and also not erode our cash balance. So that's what we're suggesting that we do, and that we revisit it again in a quarter. What I'd like to do is look at maybe the 3 or 4 pages in here that really dial that home, and then we can get into the details if you'd like. But if you look at your package, Attachment A was simply included for your benefit. That's all the data that the Utility Commission saw last September, October when we made the rate increase, so you can skip over that. That was just background for you. If you go to Attachment B, and I apologize, there's no page numbers, but there are dividers in between the sections of the package. Attachment B is the updated numbers for 12/13, and you'll see just one page. And at the bottom, you can see that originally we thought we were going to be short about $200,000, and now I'm saying we'll be short for 12/13 about $643,000. Okay. Attachment C is probably the one piece of this I'd like to focus on for just a minute, because I think this really helps to put the rate setting objectives that I talked about earlier in perspective. And this is a sheet that sideways shows a 6-year history of the balance sheets of the electric utility. So if you want to take a moment and find that page, you'll see at the top assets, then liabilities, then at the very bottom of the page, cash and working capital. And it's right behind the divider labeled Attachment C. I'll wait till everybody's on the same page, so to speak.
Well, Cindy, coming back to that page you're on, the diminishment in the liquid assets really came from our capital expenditures last year that we did not bond finance, correct?
A little bit in 12/13. One of the things we did a couple of years back, and I think you were involved in this during the budgeting process, my rate sufficiency analysis, when you look at the bottom line, and I'll point it out when we get to the 13-14 page, is designed to cover just the transfers to the capital project fund. And what we've done in the capital fund in the electric utility is it used to be budgeted every year kind of in a vacuum. And if there was a difference between expenditures and the revenues that were coming in that year, it used to just be backfilled with that, proceeds from borrowing number that was never borrowed. What we did 2 years ago was we started showing the fund balances forward as part of the 5-year capital program. And we actually budgeted purposefully in 12/13 to take a fairly large balance forward in the capital program, erode it somewhat, and then level off those transfers. So instead of having a $6 million transfer one year to the next, 8, 7, we've leveled it off right to that $3.4 million mark. And so that's what you'll see real consistently in the rate sufficiency. Again, that was part of the goal of stability. Let's not have those big ups and downs and how much money we need. Let that capital project fund sit there and go up and down a little bit over the years, but take care of itself with level transfers. Did everyone find this page?
Excuse me, just to follow up on that, it is the policy of, and has been the policy of the City Council, not to borrow for capital programs. Correct?
We haven't borrowed for capital since about 1985. There's actually a 2003 debt service outstanding, but it was a refinancing and a remarketing of some outstanding bonds to a fixed rate, so it wasn't even a 2003 borrowing. It was a refinancing of an 85 borrowing. So, but actually, along those lines, let's look at this page, because I think this will speak to the capital projects as well. If you look at the far right column there, that's the fiscal year that ended in 07-08. And at that point in time, let me just walk you through this. Assets at the top, liabilities, net assets, and most of the really important stuff is at the bottom. The annual change in net assets, which, as you all know, is not really a cash thing. It has to do with more than just cash elements. The operating expenditures minus depreciation are there all across one line, and that's what we use to calculate days of unrestricted cash on hand. And then below that, you'll see each year's total cash balance, the number of days of unrestricted cash on hand, which I think is the best liquidity indicator, and then finally the days of working capital, and that's that more esoteric definition that includes other unrestricted net assets and inventories and things like that I don't think is as good an indicator. If you look at September 30th, 2008, at that point in time, down at the bottom line, there was about 60 days of unrestricted cash on hand, about a $26 million balance. And if you go across to the next fiscal year, what you'll see is that in one single fiscal year, that number went down to 23 days of unrestricted cash on hand. And what happened, if you look right up there along the net assets line, you can see the investment in capital assets went from a little under 60 million to over 73 million. So in one single year, from cash, there was a huge investment in capital assets. And that pulled down the working capital to the 23-day mark. And at that particular point in time, the city hired a outside rate consultant who came in and said, wow, not a good thing. And over the course of the next year, if you look at 9/30/2010, the change in net assets for the year that ended 9/30/2010 was an increase of almost $14 million. And in one single year, there was a recovery of, $15 million of cash in 1 year, all the way back up to 106 days of unrestricted cash on hand. And this was the time frame in which the rates were extremely volatile. And unlike the stability that we're after, the swings were extremely wide. We're talking eroding cash by $15 million for 1 year and recovering $14 million in the following year. Not the $900,000, $600,000 margins that we're targeting right now. And then in September of 2011, you'll see, and this was actually in that summer, was about right when I came on board, rates sat without really being looked at all for almost a whole year, and we ended up with a $1.9 million decrease in net assets for that fiscal year with not enough time remaining in the fiscal year to recover that. And that was the particular year when Fitch, not to the point where it's bad, but gave us a slight little tweak down on our bond rating because of that performance. Since that time, for both year ending 9/30/2012 and year ending 9/30/2013, that's been the time frame in which we've done the slightly more forward-looking utility rate sufficiency projections, quarterly reviews, and tried hard to go back to a situation where there weren't wild swings in the cash. We've levelized the capital transfers, and we've tried to hit that 90 mark. So you see we went from 93 up to a little high water mark of around 97, and as of the end of last fiscal year, we're down just below 80. And what we're suggesting for this fiscal year, with both the rate increase we did in the fall and even the little slight decrease we're showing now, is that we'll recover from that 76 back up toward the 90 mark, which I would consider to be our goal. The last page in here that matters is the update to 1314 we were just talking about. If you just go to the very first page after attachment D, this is my high-level bottom line. At the top, you have our operating expenses for 1314. These are based on budgeted numbers, except for the purchase power, which is a combination of actuals and a projection for the rest of the year. You have our other revenue requirements, our debt service, our transfers to R&R at 3.4, our transfers to the general fund, and then down below you have our sources of revenue. As of putting in the October-November actuals, it looked like instead of $900,000 recovery that I originally projected, $931, we were up to about $1.8 million, and that's why we're recommending that we think it's reasonable to dial back that purchase power cost component, the fuel cost component a little bit, and it will bring us back around to the $800,000 or so mark for now. And then let's have a look when we're done with January, February, and March and see how we're tracking. The rest of what's behind this can be useful. Again, I've tried over the last couple of years to make this simpler and simpler. So the one page that's behind this is the detail for anybody that cares. At the bottom, you can see our original forecast when we started the year for three things: kilowatt hour sales, billed revenue, and purchase power costs. And at the top, as we move across the actuals, you can see the actuals for each of those three components. And then the last page is a graphical representation of the comparison between our original forecast and our actuals as we march through the year. And with that,
You basically benefited by a very warm November, December. We burned a lot of electrical ball.
right.
So-
And
the
if
costs
you-
were cold. So.
You're right. And if you look at the graphical representation, both October and November, our sales and our billed revenue were up over our original forecast,
Yep,
but our
yep.
purchase power costs didn't go up accordingly and actually, made our margin a bit better and improved our situation by, at least our projection of the situation, by about $800,000.
Yeah, having looked at that as well, so far in January, it's 5 degrees average colder than the long-term trend. And as Jim explained to me, that the peak cold season also leads to higher usage.
Higher electrical usage.
Yeah.
Sure.
And so, so when the first quarter number comes in, as you said, Cindy, you continually look and monitor this and see what the next steps could be in terms of a smoothing. But I wanted to point out something.
Could I point out one more thing along
Sure.
those lines too? Remember our rate structure too. When it gets really cold, that second tier of usage was designed not only, as far as I have read, for cost recovery, but also to be like many rate structures, kind of a disincentive to the higher usage. And so it jumps up sharply on the usage charges in that second tier. And so when we have a really cold month, it tends to affect the margin because more people jump into that second tier.
Right. Sure.
Cindy, when you mentioned that guidelines say you should have 90 days on hand, was that 90 days of working capital or 90 days of unrestricted cash?
From the GFOA standpoint, it's 90 days of working capital, but again, loosely defined. From a very specific bond rating standpoint, which is interesting, this is actually water and sewer bond rating criteria that I got from Fitch, like details, but, applying it loosely to any sort of an enterprise fund, they consider days of cash on hand, which is what I'm looking at, of 6 months to be a mid-range risk utility. So they actually have in the tier, when we look at the financial profile attributes and creditworthy utilities, for them 3 months or less is down in the weaker tier. And so we've gone for the 3 months, and we have other things. In other words, our debt service coverage is excellent. I mean, there are other things that mitigate that, but from a GFOA perspective, 90 days is your baseline. From a perspective of bond rating agencies, they really like to see it even higher than that. And so I think over the years, the city has concluded that we feel comfortable with 90 days.
But what this projection points out is we're doing nothing to build back to the 90 days.
Well, we would build back about $900,000.
What's that?
We would build back about $900,000 through my
this next
projection.
year, yeah.
And then also we're in a year on our capital projects where the amount of revenue we have versus the amount of expenditures we're going to make will actually build that back up a little bit too. It's one of those years where we're not spending as much in capital, at least per our projections. So I'm hoping we'll go back.
Right.
We'll go back toward the 90.
But theoretically, our gap is from a 90-day to a 74-day, 16 days, theoretically,
It is.
which would suggest it's
$1 million or
it's
two.
ballparking at about $3 million, something like that,
Right.
on a gap. So maybe take 3 years to build back to fill that 90-day gap.
It actually is about $208,000 a day. So if you wanted to add back 14 days, a couple of million, 2.3.
Yeah, think about $3 million in my head. Yeah.
One of the things, though, is that, as you mentioned in the past, there was some significant capital expenditures in the previous 5 years. The capital programs that were, as you say, were average 5, 6, 7 million, and for the next 4 years, the capital program is in the $3 to $4 million range,
Right.
which also will, again with the smoothing, begin to recapture that at a greater
Right.
rate. That was eroded if you will, with those heavy capital years.
Right.
But
Actually,
on a going forward basis, we really don't, the bond rating constraints don't really affect us because we don't really have any capital expenditures to be financed on a bond over the next
they
3 or 4 years.
They do and they don't. I mean, certainly, since we do have outstanding bonds,
To roll over.
we like to make sure that we don't,
Right.
get our current investors excited.
And so we're not going to pay a rate increase.
Right. With the performance we had the first year after that $1.9 million decrease in unrestricted net assets, with that performance and the way we've performed the last couple of years, because again, and this is where, we hate to get into this, but the rate sufficiency analysis, that one page that shows revenues and expenses, is on an almost cash basis. Okay, but the increase and decrease in net assets involves non-cash items as well, depreciation expense. Capital is principal is not an expense, that sort of thing. So between where our cash sits, our debt coverage, which is very good, again. And our increase in unrestricted or increase in net assets, the slight decrease in unrestricted net assets shouldn't, I don't believe, present a problem for our bond rating agencies at this point.
Okay.
I have another comment in terms of looking at these numbers. For this year, the budget for non-departmental is $4.3 million. Of that, $1,055,000 is budgeted for. This is on page. On page 89 of the budget, and then I'm taking the 4.3 off of the sheet. The reason I mention that is because smoothing $1,055,000 over 12 months is about $88,000 a month. For the months of the first 2 months of the quarter, it was $15,008 for the first month and $14,003 for the second. So the transactional attorneys have spent essentially $30,000, and there is some quietus given what Jim gave us as background, and until some of these decisions with FMPA. So that's a run rate, obviously, of almost $90,000 a month, as opposed to coming in to 14 or 15. So that there could be some recovery in those expenses, potentially, at least for the first part of the year, until we can go forward with the negotiation. But I thought that was instructive to understand that component is also going to be helpful when you look at your first quarter. But again, take that into consideration that it's not going to necessarily
It's not
happen.
long term.
Yeah.
Right.
But
Sure.
in any event,
We did another thing last week at the council approved another thing that will help our cash position, and that is we have to have an inspection of some tanks, fuel tanks, and so we are going to have the person doing the inspection is actually going to buy the fuel from us. In other words, we're going to turn that fuel inventory into cash, and so it actually may, on the expenditure side, be a little bit of a loss in terms of the value that it has sitting on the books in the tanks right now, but it will trade that inventory asset for some cash, and that'll improve our cash position as well.
And actually, Jim, when I heard what I heard was that it was potentially $300,000 or $400,000, or did I hear wrong?
We think it's going to be greater than that, but we have margins in the contract that we just let. It has pricing of the fuel depending on the contaminants in those and how much sediment we have at the bottom of the tank. One of the issues that we're faced with is that oil's been sitting there, talking about 4 or 5 years. And so it has, obviously it's going to have sludge at the bottom. That's a cost factor. Then we want to get to the good crude oil and then on up from that. But we're hoping somewhere in the neighborhood of $700,000 actually will be our number. And so we're working on a premise of around that area.
Sure.
Just also to let you know, we are sending a letter to OUC under our contract. Our contract with FP&L, we have ownership of the asset, i.e. the oil and we made sure that was in the contract. Under the OUC contract, we still have ownership of the oil. We have to exempt them from any exposure as we transfer the oil out of there, and so we'll be sending them a letter making them aware that, hey, we're emptying a tank and we don't plan to refill that tank. We will have it in a standby reserve in case crude oil for some reason gets lower than gas, which is unbelievable, or that we would actually need to run the plant for any length of time. But so those notices will be going out, and we're taking care of all the details of that process.
But that again impacts the cash on hand.
We'll trade some inventory on the books for some cash, and that'll help our unrestricted cash position. I'm pretty hopeful that if we stay on top of this sufficiency on a quarterly basis and keep the margin that I'm projecting right now, we'll put back between $1.5 million and probably $2 million of this reserve by the end of
years to build back
by
to
the end
90
of
days.
this fiscal year, and we'll be back in that 90 range.
Sure.
Where we
Yeah,
belong.
and those inspections, those tanks plus the lines, could have been about $800,000, $800,000 or $900,000, and so they'll be able to do one of the tanks. Will leave the fuel in one of the tanks, and they'll be able to do that robotically. And but so we're actually trading oil for inspection, which we will have cash at the end, is what we anticipate.
Thank you. Scott?
How difficult or easy is it to change the rate structure for power?
You mean in terms of actually just implementing it in the billing system?
Right.
It's relatively simple. I mean, we just have to go in. I mean, we just have to go in and adjust the rate that's in the billing system. We try to do it in a time frame, so that it hits specific billing cycles. It usually takes us a week to put it in the test bed and test it and make sure it's working right, and then roll it out for the billing cycle.
Scott, before you would do that, you really need to do a structural study of our rate structures, because adjusting, for example, peak demands and the cost of peak demands versus the base rate can throw your entire system off. So that's a pretty detailed study.
I'm sorry, I was answering a different question. I thought you meant how hard is it to change the bills?
Yeah, mechanically it's very simple. We're
talking about changing the structure of the rates, the base rates versus the usage versus the...
Right. What I'm getting at is...
That's his answer. That's incredibly detailed.
To do it on a monthly basis, that would be
you couldn't
difficult.
Do that. No.
Okay, so quarterly is the best we could do.
I think monthly is too often. Even quarterly, again... I go back to at the beginning of fiscal 12-13, I thought we were going to be short by $200,000. There were points throughout the year when I thought we were going to be up as much as $600,000, and at the end of the day, we were down by $625,000. That sounds like a lot. That's less than 1% of revenue. It takes less than half a month of a really cold or a really hot month to change our revenue off the forecast by millions of dollars. And so it's really, I wish it was a more exact science, but it's not. And I think that our rate sufficiency margins are reasonable, but I think doing it monthly would have us tend to be, hey, we're up, we're down, we're up, we're down. I mean, even quarterly might be a bit frequently. So,
okay. Well, I guess people don't like surprises, especially bad surprises.
Yeah.
So if they come in smaller increments, it's easier to swallow, obviously. So that's why I was getting at. But if it's, a big to do it on a monthly or even a quarterly basis, then obviously it's not worth doing.
Well, you have two components. One is your rates. The other is the rate structure that the customer actually pays. I was referring to the rate structure because the structure itself, and eventually we're going to have to do a rate structure study and make sure we're allocating cost to the appropriate customers. This would not, in my opinion, be the appropriate time since we're in the process of trying to negotiate a contract on the sale. But adjusting the rates is the other issue. The other one, Scott, that it is part of that is the component of weather. It's easy to put in a rate decrease or a rate increase, let's say, during shoulder months. And when we had the rate decrease in October, those are typically shoulder months. It just so happened this was a quirky year and we had colder front, so it impacted the customer, which impacted our revenues differently than we really projected, and that's the reason for the rate decrease. And if you put a rate decrease in during the peak summer months, then you obviously are going to see a major change in your revenue stream. So it really depends on what quarter you're making your adjustments as to how you project going forward. And that's what Cindy tries to do, is based on our history, what are our shoulder months and what are our peak months, and so we can make those projections to make sure that we don't throw ourselves out of whack that way as well.
Okay.
But really, when you look at it, you're talking about a 1% change on the revenue side. Now, a $90 million deal, 1% is pretty marginal to be fiddling with. I mean, your air factor is usually bigger than that. And to me, I mean, when we start talking about changing quarterly, we're really increasing the uncertainty, both from our customer's point of view and our own point of view. And we're also getting ourselves into, a sort of a micromanagement of a $100 million operation. And I can't think that that's going to reflect very well long term on our bond ratings either. I mean, they're looking for stability in our cash flow and our management systems. If we were forecasting plus or minus, 6 or 8%, that'd be one other thing. But I mean, a 1% situation that we're even worried about seems to me a little bit
Well, you're looking at it
misguided,
from the revenue side. I'm looking at it from the customer side, people paying. So a decrease from 76.50 to 74 or increase, that's around 5%.
Sure.
Actually,
Go
it
on
was
the-
1% of the total bill, because this is only one component of the bill.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
That's
So
true. I didn't
it went
think
up
about that
when
part
we
of it.
when we went up 250 in October. It was a 1.9% increase, and what we're proposing is a 1.1% decrease. It's the relative.
Still only
That's-
1%.
that's a good point.
Still only
That's
1% over $990 million spread over the whole customer base. That's pretty minor.
But we went a couple of years where we adjusted it only once a year. So I think what we're suggesting is what we've been doing. Let's monitor it quarterly.
Sure.
And we feel pretty good about this decrease. I mean, we're talking about our projection after only 2 months of solid actuals was up $800,000. So we feel really comfortable with this decrease. And this puts us back to being up by about $800,000 or so. But unless I see another huge swing after the second quarter, I don't know that we'd say let's change it again. Let's just monitor quarterly and then do what makes sense. I mean,
Okay.
but monthly I think is a bit much, even for the customer. I mean,
And we were trying to do it annually, but Glenn coming back, one of the issues, because we want to make sure the term transparency applies here. When we were projecting our rate increase, a number that we put out, and as I told Cindy when she and I were going over these multiple times, we put out a number of $900,000 was what our projection of loss was, or decrease in capital last year, and it came in the audit at 640. Well, I want people to know we're not a bank, and we don't propose to be a bank, and so with that number sliding down like it did, which was a pretty obvious number, then that's the reason we came to you. I don't think we need to adjust 1% one way or the other every quarter, but at the same time, when something sort of sticks out, and at our rates that we were projecting with that 1.9%, we would overcollect. And so next year at the time that we were under projecting, we may have a little more cash than we wanted, at least to be justifying that we're holding. And so I guess there's a little bit more that goes into it than the 1.1, and I agree. I mean, that's a pretty marginal. But in reality, 1.9% was pretty marginal. And on shoulder months, it's
Certainly,
insignificant.
it certainly seems to me to demonstrate your good faith by coming back and saying, hey, maybe it was a little too aggressive, and come back down to what you're now proposing, the 75 versus 74 to 75 versus 74 to 76.5. I think the public recognizes you're trying to do the job right, and we need goodwill in the community too. So that certainly makes sense to me. And it certainly makes sense to be monitoring it on a quarterly basis also. We certainly don't want to end up like we did a couple of years ago where it snuck up on us. But it's probably true, and I think the Vice Mayor is correct, that over the next 12 to 14, 15 months, gas prices are going to remain low.
Which would be excellent.
It's clear
It slides
oil prices seem to be in deterioration too. So they're probably going forward. We could have a good year if the weather holds. coming back to where we're trying to be, I think, again, if it serves the public correctly, is that we should be more in line with what the bond ratings group would like us to be for our long-term stability, because we, as the Vice Mayor points out, there's no guarantee that we're going to sell this utility plant. So at some point, we got to keep our bond ratings up. You know?
Yeah, and again, my goals have been for the last couple of years. We consummate the sale, excellent. But in the meantime, this is a going concern that needs to be operated like a going concern. We need to cover our expenses.
Correct.
We need to make sure we have appropriate balances, and that we have contingencies covered if they should come to pass. So, but again, I really and thank you. That's the message that I think we're trying to convey. We are not, as Jim put it, trying to be a bank. We are not targeting a rate that's going to recover tens of millions of dollars for us this year. We are on a very thin margin. I look at it monthly, but share it with both you and the utility commission or some version thereof on a quarterly basis, and try really hard to keep any rate increases that we think are necessary to a minimum, and where it seems like it's comfortable to do it, to dial them back. It would be great if over the next quarter and then the quarter after that, if those purchase power costs, which are really the driver here, slide backwards, and then we keep sliding backwards with these adjustments, but without any huge swings and without too much one direction or the other.
Do you get advance notice of changes in the purchase power prices? Or you get a bill in arrears?
We get a bill in arrears.
Oh, wow.
That's not literal.
It's true. We do. When we pay in November, we pay on November 21st for power that we actually consumed in October.
They have no projection for you.
Well, they do in that. I mean, it's not just a complete guess. They do in that we get numbers from them that cause us to make our projection for the whole year. But we don't get phone calls, to my knowledge, saying, "Oh, by the way, you're about to have a good month." We simply get a bill.
They give us a spectrum that we work with that Tom really gives Cindy the numbers to project from, but it's a give or take.
An annual? Or
Annually, they do those projections.
So they don't do it more often than annually.
No. And it is, and from their perspective, what they're doing is they're buying fuel on the spot market. And so they're generating electricity. We're buying from them from fuel they bought on the spot market. And when they send us a bill, they even have a provision in our bills for true-ups. And if the fuel goes up, then they can send us a true-up bill higher than what we actually paid.
Well, just one comment about this particular focus on the discussion today is that the data, in fact, is 2 months or virtually most of the quarter, and at least projected now, there doesn't seem to be anything. And with the focus, and if I'm hearing you correctly, Glenn, really for good faith to the public and to the customers, knowing the data that we have in front of us and that has been publicized in terms of the potential lower rates. Before I would take a motion, because we have been recommended, have been requested by the council to understand and review the presentation and make a recommendation. But I was wondering if the vice mayor or the councilwoman would like to have any comments before I would call for a motion.
First off, I want to thank you guys for taking a look at this. This issue has been very contentious over the years, but, somewhere along the line, we just got to get down to doing the business of doing what our people want. This is all in your hands. Whatever you guys want to do with it, we respect your time and effort in looking into this. And we would appreciate a motion as to what you guys think is best.
Thank you.
Hi there. I've spoken with Cindy on this. I looked at the numbers, and one of the things about the the rollback in the increase from October was where are we actually? And now that we know that, I think that it's important, like Mr. Brevant was saying, to show good faith to the public and at the same time still protect ourselves, which Cindy has worked very hard on doing. And so I thank you guys for considering this and considering the public when we're moving forward in this, because everyone's tired. Everyone wants some relief. And even if it's only 1.1%, that's still money no one has to pay if they don't have to. So thank you.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Then I would make a motion that we approve the recommendation of the staff and the continual monitoring of the progress through the quarter.
I'll second.
Mr. Chairman, can you clarify that what we're approving is a shift down to 75?
That is the
Versus-
staff recommendation in the
Okay.
cover memo that's going to council. That's our recommendation.
That will result in a rate reduction.
Exactly. Our recommendation is that we reduce the power cost component from 70/50, where it sits now, to 75,
Right.
effective January 1st. The way it works is it'll go into the billing system on February the 1st, and it will hit the bills for people's reads that began on January the 1st. So it really hits people's January usage in their February bill.
Right.
Yes, I'm good with that.
I'm good with it.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Passes unanimously.
Thank you.
The last agenda item. Sometimes we felt like that people were eating our breakfast, but in any event, we were required are required each year to make an annual report of what our accomplishments or what the of the previous year. And purposely, we held off doing that because we did not know what the composition of the council was going to be, because one of the components of this is not only the accomplishments, but also some goals and objectives for the following year. This was provided in backup when it was posted on the website, and each of the members, I presume. And I would like your comment and input. Obviously, I had gone through the minutes. We had talked about some of these issues at our various meetings. And I just wanted to have something as a target for each of the commissioners to look at and have the input as to what we would want to present to the city council as our accomplishments or the activities that we had engaged in through the year.
Mr. Chairman, I reviewed it carefully, and I think you did a great job of it, and I don't have any problems on the going forward program for 2014. I'm in good shape on it.
Thank you.
You know, if I could make one comment, I think would help us all. I think sometimes we're a little remiss in setting the schedules properly so people know when we're going to have the meetings early enough so they can make arrangements for it. This last one was called on a fairly short notice. So I think we could do a better job on that. And furthermore, I think it's a little difficult to focus on the minutes of a committee that are 90 days old. We could do a little better job, I think, of getting the minutes done on a early enough timetable so us old folks can remember what in the hell did we say. Excuse my language. So,
Was it early dementia?
it would, yeah. But if we could focus on that this next year would helpful.
I am adding that. Scott and Catherine, do you have any comments?
No, I think very good job.
Well, it's a job that all of you guys did this year, as a matter of fact. All I did was write down what was in the
Well
minutes.
written.
Oh, I wasn't fishing for compliments, but thank you very much.
I did have only one comment, and that is, when we talked about it a few meetings ago about the PAFR, I got very excited, and I'm still very excited, but I'm also hopeful that can be sandwiched into something between now and April. So we're going to take our best crack at it. I put together a little bit of a draft, and if nothing else, maybe we'll have one and it'll get better as years go by. But that's something that's a goal, and hopefully I'll achieve it. We'll give it our best shot.
Thank you. Scott, comments?
As for the scheduling the meetings, I don't know, sometimes we do it, sometimes we don't. Sherry sometimes calls me or sends me an email, I believe, and asks, is this a good date? Mm-hmm. I'm assuming she does that to everyone else as well, and you either say yay or nay, and we go from there. Is that a big pain to do, Sherry?
No, it's not hard.
Because to me, that works the best. That way everybody has a good idea if they can make it and if not, and I kind of like that method, if we can continue with that.
Will do. One of the issues was that we had originally set the date for the 16th because not only is the commissioners, but those who are on the agenda also have to have their availability. And what happened was there became a conflict. Once we had originally set the date for the 16th, this particular meeting, and then it had to be changed back one day, the 15th, and that, in fact, did truncate what we normally would have otherwise had. But I take the...
I think if we're obviously not meeting as often as we were, right? And therefore, it seems to me it's a little easier to go ahead and forecast that it's going to be in the third week of the month or something like that, so that people can plan. I mean, they're part of our people are in the accounting department. They need to make meetings. Some of us do a fair amount of traveling, and it would be even if it's shifts. But if somebody plans for the third week, then they know the third week of the month we will have a meeting. And I think it's incumbent upon us to have a full meeting board. It represents the city as a whole, and we need the intellectual input from a variety of people. So, Scott, I identify with what you're saying, but I also recognize people that do have business that call them out of the city a fair amount. We're going to lose them,
Well,
their participation.
Scheduling something for a week at least doesn't help me personally.
Sure.
I need a day and actually a time, so I don't schedule anything else that would overlap or conflict with that.
But so does everybody else. So if she's trying to manage 5 to 6 people's time schedule, and that can get pretty hairy.
Well, that's why I just asked her, and she said it was no problem.
Well, I mean, she says that because other people will adjust to make it all work. I mean, some of us just shut down our other meetings to make this meeting and said, all right, we'll shift our meetings around. And that works for some of us that are more local in nature, but other of us travel a fair amount, and that's harder to do,
I think, part of it is just as a comment, if we could schedule regular meetings around the review of quarterly financial reports, for instance, because those can be on a very regular schedule for me. Right. What sometimes becomes a little bit of a challenge is when council makes a special request that the Finance Commission look at a particular issue, in a particular time frame. And that was certainly the impetus behind this meeting. We had originally talked about waiting until the last week of the month and then just looking at quarterly reports. But the issue of the utility rates and the potential adjustment became an important one and needed to be before council timely enough for it to actually be a first quarter adjustment and not it be into February and March. So, I apologize. Sometimes it does, for me anyway, become trying to get to the commission in a timely fashion to take something then to council in a timely fashion.
That having been said, you and I have discussed that, which is why we had this meeting scheduled. And I rely on Cindy to give feedback in terms of when she'll have the information prepared. So for the quarterly report, what would be a good date?
The way the quarterly reporting works is we cannot close our general ledger for the prior month until the 20th of the month. We don't get bank statements. We don't get investment statements. It's just like you know, at home. You get your bank statements and you got to do the reconciliations, make the journal entries. So I don't actually get a general ledger upon which I can prepare reports until the 20th of the month of each month. And then it takes me another 3 or 4 or 5 days, you know, a good working week, particularly with some of the additional stuff that I'm going to try to add to these quarterly reports to put together a report and get it bound and get it out to everyone. So in reality, we're looking at, if you want to do quarterly reviews, the last week of the month following the end of the quarter, the last week of January.
Or the first week of the following month, you know.
Or the first week of the following month would make me
give
even
yourself
happier.
some slack, you know.
Well, and give you some time to look at what I'm going to provide. I mean, you don't want to get it, and then the next day we have a meeting. So, you know, that's just and you're all accounting and finance types. That's just the practical reality. I don't get the month closed on the second day of the following month.
It's understandable.
So, yeah.
Yeah, and where I was coming from is that having said that, not that the concept I'll add to the report, but specifically what you would recommend as our next Finance Commission meeting in February, when you would feel comfortable to be able to provide the and normally there's the 2 council meetings each month. And we have tried to schedule these after one of them so that if something comes up, we can be prepared to report. So we try to go between the 2 of them relatively.
For the quarterly reporting, I like Mr. Brevant's idea, the first week of the following month. So February, first week of May, first week of August.
Yeah. I mean,
It works for me. And then that way, if there are other things that that can fall into that timing, we can do that. And then
And the
obviously,
ad hoc
if
demands.
there's a special issue that council needs your support for, then we can adjust to that as needed.
Mm-hmm.
Certainly, it changes during budget season sometimes because of the schedule of budget workshops and your input for those. But
Comments?
Yeah, I'm good with that. So the only time that potentially Sherry would have to call us is on a special call requested by City Council.
a special topic that needs your input.
All right, yeah, I'm good with that.
Okay, I would like to just add 2 things. Not add, but one of the things, Cindy, you talked about in our goals and objectives is a number of meetings, but one of them is we discussed having a popular annual financial report for the public to be able to better understand the budgeting process instead of 400 pages of.
Actually, it was for the CAFR. The popular annual financial report would be a public user-friendly version of the CAFR. Is the intent there, and not a budget synopsis.
Oh,
maybe
no.
maybe down the road we would actually try that too, because there are popular budgeting reports too. But I thought maybe what we would try is tackling the popular annual financial report one first, and then maybe later on try the budget one.
Yeah, public can follow that. I think that's pretty reasonable.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Actually, you sent us some samples, maybe 3 cities.
Did you like them?
I
I mean,
really liked them. I
Yeah,
thought
yeah, I
they
did too.
were
And
really
I,
useful to the
again, our
public.
first one might not be mind blowing like that, but we can try it and tweak it a little bit and see what we think. The CAFR will actually be complete on time at the end of March, so I'm thinking in the April-May timeframe for a first crack at a PAFR. It may be in the same time frame as the end of the CAFR. It just depends on how the rest of that goes.
Is there a day of the week that is most suitable for the meeting? Wednesdays are good for me. So that quarterly meeting, the first week after the close, could it be on a Wednesday or what? Or does
I'm
it
good
not?
with either day as long as I know what we're doing. I mean, if it works better for Scott to be towards the end of the week, I mean, I'm
No,
fine with that.
again, I'm the same. As long as I know in advance, I can make it any day.
Okay.
But Wednesdays are good.
Or for
That's fine.
staff, if there's a better day of a week.
Always,
For me, it's
probably isn't it but better to follow the city council meeting on Tuesday and make it on Wednesdays? Because
Yeah, Wednesdays
sometimes
are-
on Monday you're booked up with other things.
yeah. Wednesdays are typically good, and that way too. I can make sure you get it the week before, and that gives you time over the weekend if
Well, what do you know?
We need to,
If you're not
we
doing
need to
something
watch
more
for
fun
the other
than
boards and
reviewing
commissions too, and make sure
quarterly
they're not
financials.
meeting
You guys
on
work it
that
out
day.
Wednesday or Thursday if that works.
Yeah, Wednesday or Thursday, either one's fine with me.
Wednesday or Thursday. Well, the council meetings are on Tuesday.
Right.
And my only concern is that if we have it right after, the day after, all of a sudden there might be something that tumbles out that we would need to get data on. But that's fine for me. Within a week of the first council meeting, on whatever day,
I can't imagine the council is going to throw out anything fast enough that we have to respond in 2 days. Not going to happen, right?
well,
I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman.
well, my point is that there are some times at the council meetings that I attend and listen to, issues come up that perhaps we should address. But in any event, I'm not trying to micromanage either. Fine. As soon as reasonably to be scheduled to accommodate all of the commissioners following the first week's meeting of the council.
So first week
You're
of
changing the terminology,
But
Mr.
I'll make
Chairman.
it. Here's this. I finally counted this correctly. I'm
Yeah.
not a calendar person. I'm a math person. It would be the first week of February, the first week of May, the first week of August, and the first week of November for quarterly reports. And that would be that
I'm fine with that.
On a Wednesday
on a Wednesday
at 2:00.
at 2:00, and then other meetings on special topics as
Yeah.
requested.
Right.
If we can pull them together.
Cindy, did you say one of them was March?
One of them is November, February, May, and
Oh, May.
August. Yeah.
So we're talking February 5th?
Mhm.
That figures I won't be here. After all that.
There's one other perhaps committee that that we had talked about, and not committee necessarily, but some focus. I know, Glenn, you have been working on the pension issue. Catherine, you've been working with Cindy on a number of different financial issues, but there is this technological changes and efficiencies in the cashier's function that you
Was hoping to bring that to the February 5th meeting.
a review of it.
Yeah. We've got some things back, I think you remember during budget season, there was some talk about either reducing cashier hours or closing the cashiering function entirely. We've actually spent the last 3 or 4 months doing a business process review with Wells Fargo Bank. They've made some great suggestions for a few technologies, banking technologies we can implement that we think will lighten our workload in the cashiering function. And I took an action item from council to come back within 6 months or so with here's what I think we should do with the cashiering function long term. So I'm going to put some numbers and thoughts together and run that by you guys so that before I take it to the council, I run it by you.
Actually, I think our quarterly meeting is timely enough, but for closing the books you mentioned, waiting for bank statements, is it possible to have paperless statements, to do online?
It's really not the cash reconciliation statements. It's our pension statements, things that come from the SBA, things that come from Prudential, and our investments, regions and things like that. So, plus, it's payroll entry. It just takes some time.
Sometimes online they're available at least a week earlier.
No, we do that. We do cash balancing online. It really comes down sometimes to our statements, and then we have a fair number of monthly adjustments too. So the goal that my staff has been given is the GL's closed, all the adjusting entries are made, and the books are printed by the 20th of the month, and that gives me the time I need too. So.
Cindy, did I miss the general fund and pension review? Well, I thought
Not yet. We haven't scheduled it
I
yet.
haven't scheduled it in January, right? I haven't
no.
heard. Okay.
No.
I was just going back to the report. I was just going to add timely meeting scheduling. Timely and definite. How's that sound? That's settle everything.
I don't know about that's it.
Okay.
With that being said, may I have a motion to approve the report to the City Council?
Also move.
Second.
Favor?
Aye.
Aye.
With that, are there any commissioners' matters you wish to speak to?
Mr. Chairman, did you resolve the 5th meeting that Scott maybe, if you're going to set that Wednesday of February?
Well,
Sure.
they did say either the Wednesday or the Thursday.
I'm
You
out
can't
of
do the
town for the
Thursday
whole
either.
week. Builder show.
So you're going for the Builder Show the whole week?
Las Vegas.
Las Vegas, so that's important.
We could have the Finance Commission meeting.
Okay. Now
We could
got
move
it.
the whole meeting to Las Vegas if that works for everybody.
Well, for this specific meeting, would you want to push it out a week? So,
Don't we have another board member not here, too?
no, it's not here yet.
And what about Dan? Is Dan on the board?
Dan, yes.
Yes, he's your alternate.
So he's an alternate.
So,
If you want to push it into the following week, I will say this. As you well know from the last couple of years, the first quarter of the fiscal year is not very exciting in terms of, budget versus actuals. I mean, not a lot happens. And I haven't seen anything in the first quarter that's alarming at this point. So
I hate you to move it just for me, but it's up to you guys.
well, I would prefer to have so that with Noah being new and for 1 week, as you said, I mean, the bond payments don't come in, and there's a whole host of things that distort the first quarter in terms of.
The only thing Mr. Chairman, in all deference, I mean, everybody's going to have a reason not to show up in 1 week or another. And I mean, if we're going to have meetings and people know they're on boards, we have to sort of work within the confines so everybody knows. And I don't think it's any big deal if Scott doesn't show up on the February meeting, Scott. And I just don't. But if we start changing it for 1 week or another because somebody's out of town, we're going to be back to where we were, and that's not helpful. Plus, I think it's important if the public wants to come to these meetings, they know they're going to be here the first week in the month or the quarter. If they want to hear what's going on financially, then they know the first week of the quarter ended, the month ended, it's in the paper. They know when to come. I think it's better to have a fixed schedule and sort of work around it.
We have a packed house today, I see.
What's that? They left us.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, actually, there were 3 publications that had mentioned this meeting.
They're unlikely. A lot of people won't show up, but there may be people watching it on television. I don't know. I don't know if anybody cares.
Well, I record. Well, hopefully we do. Okay.
So are we back on February the 5th? Are you okay with that?
Yeah, that's fine.
All right. February the 5th and the other dates, whatever those numbers are, for the first week of the month, for the quarter
On a Wednesday at 2.
that Cindy had mentioned.
I'll move for a meeting closure.
All in favor of adjourning?
Aye.
Aye.
Consensus. Thank you
Consensus.
very much.